Like everything in life, combat has a natural cycle. In the previous session, we introduced the 3 combat disciplines. These interact with each other in an important pattern. Here are 3 skeletons, each representing one of 3 combat disciplines. Listen carefully as I explain the relationship each discipline has to the others. Melee attacks are most effective against ranged armor. However, they're ineffective against magic armor. Ranged attacks are most effective against magic armor, but they're ineffective against melee armor. Lastly, magic attacks are most effective against melee armor. However, they are ineffective against ranged armor. That is what is known in the trade as the combat triangle. It may seem like a lot to take in, but just remember. Melee has the edge against ranged. Range gets the better of magic. And magic is powerful against melee. If you remember these simple rules, you can better prepare yourself for fighting different opponents. We will now demonstrate how quickly an experienced combatant can react to the combat triangle. My friend here will now attack one of the skeletons. Equip yourself, adventurer. Let's start by attacking the melee skeleton. Excellent. Now attack the ranged skeleton. Excellent. Now attack the magic skeleton. Great. This was a prime example of how to best manipulate the combat triangle. Learn it. It will save your life. For this session, we will be identifying and exploiting our opponent's weaknesses. First, you need to understand that different weapons inflict different kinds of damage. There are 3 types of damage you can deal with melee weapons. Weapons such as daggers, spears, and short swords have stabbing points. Long swords, battle axe, and scimitars have slashing blades. Finally, maces, warhammers, and mauls have crushing heads. Now, let's further inspect a typical melee weapon. The blade or head of the weapon dictates whether it is suited to stabbing, slashing, or crushing. Now we shall cover ranged weaponry. The damage you cause will depend on the ammunition you use. Short bows and shield bows use arrows. Pistol crossbows and heavy crossbows use bolts. Thrown weapons are a damage type in themselves. These include... Now, let's look at a typical ranged weapon. Arrows, bolts, and thrown projectiles each cause damage in different ways. Finally, the different kinds of spell. Air spells. Water spells. Earth spells. Fire spells. Now, let's examine a magic spell. Your spellbook will tell you which element a spell belongs to. Air, water, earth, or fire. At first glance, you may not notice what your opponent is vulnerable to. You will need to inspect your enemy carefully. Let's look at how to do that. When you know what you're looking for, you can read your opponent like a book. In this case, we can identify that our opponent is ill-equipped for defending against melee, with a specific weakness towards slashing weapons. An opponent who has a specific weakness to stabbing, slashing, or crushing weapons will be almost as weak to melee weapons in general. Likewise, having a strong weakness to arrows or bolts or throwing weapons makes your opponent broadly poor against ranged weapons. And of course, a specific weakness to air, water, earth, or fire will also indicate a general weakness to all magic spells. Exploiting the specific weakness can give you an upper hand, but failing that, you should use one of the other damage types in the same combat discipline. In your travels, you should expect to meet formidable opponents that do not show a weakness. Then, any combat discipline will be equally effective. Now, let's demonstrate how to exploit the weakness your enemy shows. Inspect the dummy and attack it appropriately. Excellent. Try another. Understand your opponent before you rush into a fight. Adventurer, show the students how to analyze their opponent. Understand your opponent before you rush into a fight. Understand your opponent before you rush into a fight. Adventurer, understand your opponent before... Understand your opponent. Understand your opponent before you rush into... Excellent. Try another. Understand? Great. That'll do. Now, I hope you've all seen the benefits of exploiting your enemy's weaknesses.